It's just a sketchbook, Daniel. Relax. He's 4 years old. You don't scream at a 4-year-old over a sketchbook. That was my brother's voice, flat and unbothered, standing in the doorway of my childhood bedroom while his son sat on the floor surrounded by torn pages. Not just any pages. 5 years of hand-drawn architectural concepts, site studies, material boards, and client presentation drafts, the entire physical foundation of the pitch I was delivering to Hargrove and Lund Development on Thursday morning. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 31 years old. And that was the moment I stopped recognizing my family. I had driven 3 hours to my parents' house that Sunday because my father asked me to come for dinner. Said it had been too long. Said my mother missed me. I brought work because I always bring work. The pitch for Hargrove and Lund was the biggest of my career, a mixed-use waterfront development in Charleston, South Carolina, worth somewhere north of $40 million in architectural fees alone if my firm landed the contract. I had been working on it for 8 months. The sketchbooks, 2 of them, thick and worn, held everything that hadn't made it into the digital files yet. Spatial flow studies, hand-lettered annotations from site visits, a perspective series I'd drawn by hand because the client specifically requested hand-rendered visuals for the first presentation. Things you cannot recreate from memory overnight. My nephew got into the room while I was helping my mother set the table. He found the sketchbooks on the bed. By the time I walked back in, he had ripped out at least 40 pages, crumpled most of them, and was in the process of drawing over the ones he hadn't destroyed yet with a red marker. I stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds before I could speak. I said his name. I said, "Stop. Stop right now." He looked up at me and laughed, the way small children laugh when they don't understand consequences. And then my brother appeared behind me and said what he said. "It's just a sketchbook. Relax. He's 4. I turned around slowly. My brother was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, not even looking at the damage, just looking at me like I was the problem in the room. "That's 8 months of work," I said. He shrugged. "So redraw it." My mother came in behind him, took one look at the floor, and said, "Oh, Daniel, you shouldn't have left it where he could reach it." She said it the way you'd scold someone for leaving candy near a dog. Gentle. Completely missing the point. Then she scooped up my nephew and kissed his forehead and told him it was time for dinner. My father didn't come to the room at all. When I walked downstairs, he was already at the table pouring iced tea, and when I told him what happened, he set down the pitcher and said, "You know how your brother's kid is. He gets into everything. Just use your computer versions. The hand renders don't exist on a computer, Dad. The client asked for hand-drawn. That was the whole point. Then draw them again," he said, like it was nothing. Like 8 months of spatial logic and texture studies and hand-lettered callouts could be reproduced in 4 days. "You're talented. That's why they hired you." I sat through dinner. I didn't eat much. My brother talked about his fantasy football league for 20 minutes. My mother refilled everyone's water. My nephew threw green beans at the wall and everyone laughed. I sat there and thought about Thursday morning and the Hargrove and Lund conference room and the 2 partners I'd spent 8 months trying to impress, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. That quiet feeling wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger exactly. It was the sound of a decision being made. After dinner, I excused myself and went back upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at what was left. A few intact pages near the back of the second book. Some crumpled ones that might be salvageable if I flattened them carefully. Most of it was gone. The red marker had bled through multiple pages in places. I gathered everything usable into a folder, tucked it carefully into my bag, and carried both sketchbooks downstairs. My brother was on the couch watching TV. My mother was in the kitchen. My father had fallen asleep in his recliner. I set the destroyed sketchbooks on the coffee table in front of my brother. He glanced at them, then back at the screen. "What? I need you to look at this," I said. "Not glance at it. Look." He sighed and looked. Torn pages, red marker, warped covers where his son had apparently spilled something on one corner. He looked for about 4 seconds. "I'll buy you a new sketchbook," he said. "That's not what I'm asking for." "Then what do you want, Daniel? An apology?" "He's 4. He doesn't know what a sketchbook is." "You knew what it was," I said. "You were standing right there when I told you. You told me to relax." He muted the TV and turned to face me fully for the first time all evening. "You need to stop acting like your job is more important than everyone else in this family. We all have lives. We all have stress. You're not the only one." I picked up the sketchbooks and walked out the front door. I drove to a motel 40 minutes away, not because I couldn't afford better, but because I needed something simple and quiet. 4 walls and a desk and no noise. I set up my laptop and my drawing tablet and I started working at 11 o'clock that night. I did not sleep. What my family didn't know. What I had never mentioned to any of them because it had never come up, and also because I had long since stopped sharing professional details with people who responded to them with glazed eyes, was that my firm ran an internal project management system called Build Vault. Every file I touched at work synced to it automatically. Every scanned sketch, every photo I took of hand drawings during site visits, every version of every plan, all of it lived in Build Vault. I had photographed nearly every page of both sketchbooks over the past 8 months as a matter of habit, uploading them to the project folder after each work session. Not as a formal backup strategy. Just habit. The same way I photographed physical material samples before shipping them to clients. When I opened the Hargrove and Lund project folder at 11:15 that night and saw every photograph organized by date and drawing type, I exhaled for the first time in hours. The hand renders were gone physically, yes. But every reference, every proportion study, every annotated detail, it was all there, documented. I couldn't hand the client photographs of drawings, but I could redraw from them. Accurately. Quickly. I knew every line because I had drawn them all once already. I worked through the night and most of the next day. By Tuesday evening, I had redrawn the perspective series, refined 2 of them in the process, and rebuilt the material board from digital sources. By Wednesday night, the presentation was better than the original. Not because my nephew's destruction was a gift, it wasn't, but because being forced to redraw everything from scratch with fresh eyes meant I caught a proportion error in the north facade study that had been nagging at me for weeks without me being able to identify it. I fixed it. The drawing was cleaner. Thursday morning, I walked into the Hargrove and Lund conference room with a full presentation case, a flash drive, and the kind of focus that only comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. The 2 partners, a woman named Margaret Hargrove who had been in the industry for 30 years and a younger man named Chris Lund who had made his name in adaptive reuse projects, were already seated when I arrived. A third person I didn't recognize sat at the far end of the table taking notes. I set up without rushing. I laid the hand renders across the presentation board one by one. I watched Margaret Hargrove lean forward when the waterfront perspective went up. For the next 90 minutes, I talked about the project the way I had been thinking about it for 8 months, not as a deliverable but as a living place. As a neighborhood that didn't exist yet but would, and what it would feel like to walk through it at 7 in the morning with coffee or at dusk with your kid. I talked about the light studies. I talked about the material choices and why Charleston's humidity required specific detailing decisions that most firms overlooked on first pass. I talked about the residents who would live there and what they deserved. When I finished, Chris Lund tapped his pen against his legal pad twice and said, "The facade study on the north building. When did you catch that proportion issue?" I smiled. "About 48 hours ago." He nodded like that answered something. Margaret Hargrove looked at the render for another long moment and then said, "We've seen 6 presentations for this project. This is the only one that felt like the architect had actually stood on that site. I had stood on that site 4 times. We talked numbers for an hour after that. By the time I walked out onto the street in the afternoon sun, I had a preliminary letter of intent in my bag and a follow-up meeting scheduled for the following week. It wasn't a signed contract, but it was as close as you get before the lawyers get involved. I sat in my car for a while, not driving anywhere. I thought about Sunday night, about my brother's voice, about my father refilling iced tea like nothing had happened, about my mother kissing my nephew's head and carrying him to the dinner table. I had spent years being the useful one, the one who showed up. When my brother's transmission failed 2 winters ago, I paid for the repair because he said he was between paychecks and the bill was $1,800. When my parents' water heater died last spring, I replaced it not because they asked exactly, but because my father mentioned it once in passing, and I called the plumber the next day and paid the invoice without discussing it. When my mother decided she wanted to redo her home office, I spent a weekend helping her clear it out, paint it, and reassemble the furniture. I brought her a desk chair from my own spare room because hers was broken and I happened to have a good one. I had also, over the past 3 years, been slowly furnishing my brother's house. Not intentionally, but piece by piece, occasion by occasion. His birthday. A housewarming I helped throw, a just because moment when he mentioned his TV had died. I had bought things that were now living in his home. A 65-inch television, a sectional couch in the living room, the standing desk in his home office where he supposedly worked remotely, the espresso machine on his kitchen counter that he had seen in a magazine and mentioned wanting out loud in front of me, once, at Christmas. I had bought it the following week and driven it over in my car. None of it was ever paid back. None of it was ever seriously thanked. It was just absorbed, the way a house absorbs everything eventually, and I became the person who bought things, and that was just how it was. I started making a list in the Notes app on my phone. I was methodical about it because I am an architect and I document things. Item, approximate purchase date, approximate value. I had receipts for most of it in my email. I never delete purchase confirmations. By the time I finished the list, I was looking at somewhere between $9,000 and $11,000 in personal property currently living in my brother's house. Property I had purchased. Property with no shared ownership, no repayment, no arrangement of any kind. It was a Tuesday when I went to get it back. My brother works from home and his wife takes their son to preschool every morning at 8:30. I knew this because I had heard about their routine 100 times at family dinners. I arrived at 9. I had arranged a 2-man crew from a moving company the day before. I told them I was retrieving personal property from a residence where I had temporarily stored some items. Which was entirely accurate. I had brought a folder with printed copies of every relevant email receipt: the TV from Best Buy, the sectional from Article, the desk from Herman Miller, the espresso machine from Williams-Sonoma. Everything time-stamped, everything to my address initially, everything with my payment method. My brother answered the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants, clearly surprised to see me on a Tuesday morning with 2 men in matching polo shirts standing behind me. "What's going on?" he said. "I'm picking up my things," I said. "Your things?" He looked at the crew behind me. "What things?" I handed him the top sheet from the folder. It was a simple, itemized list: TV, sectional, standing desk, espresso machine. 4 other smaller items. Beside each one was the purchase date and the dollar amount and a note that read, "Purchased by Daniel Marsh, no repayment received." He stared at the paper. "You can't just take the couch, Daniel. We live here." "I can," I said. "It's my couch. I bought it. Here's the receipt." I showed him the email on my phone, the article order confirmation from 3 years ago, the shipping address that had been his at the time, my payment information. "I'm not asking for reimbursement. I'm taking the items. This is insane." "You told me to relax," I said. "I'm very relaxed." He tried to argue for about 4 minutes. He said it was a gift. I asked him to show me any documentation of that, a text, an email, anything where I had used the word gift. He couldn't. He said he'd call my mother. I told him to go ahead. He said this was going to destroy the family. I said the family seemed to be doing that on its own. Eventually, he stepped back from the door. I don't know if it was because he had no legal ground to stand on and knew it, or because the 2 movers were very politely and professionally waiting for access, or because he was just not prepared for any of this before his first cup of coffee. Maybe all 3. The crew was efficient. They had the sectional out in under 20 minutes. The TV off the wall and wrapped in 45. The desk disassembled and boxed in another 30. I carried the espresso machine out myself because I didn't want it bumped. My brother sat in the kitchen the entire time on his phone, not looking at me. When we were done, the living room had a television-shaped blank on the wall and a rectangular impression on the carpet where the sectional had lived for 3 years. I stood in the doorway and looked at the room for a moment. "I'm keeping the receipts," I told him. "If anyone has questions about ownership, I have everything documented." He didn't respond. My phone started ringing on the drive to the storage unit where the crew was delivering everything. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father. Then my mother again. Then a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be my sister-in-law, calling from a different phone, which told me my brother had already briefed her. I let all of them go. I was navigating, and also, I had nothing useful to say to any of them at that moment. The voicemails came in over the next 2 hours. My mother's first one was confused, more hurt than angry, asking me to call her and explain what I was thinking. Her second one was angrier. My father's was short, just "Daniel, call me. This is not how we handle things in this family." My sister-in-law's message used the word cruel twice and the phrase "our home" 4 times, which I noted because nothing in that home was hers or my brother's in the sense she seemed to mean it. I let the messages sit. I drove to my firm's office, made myself coffee from the machine in the break room, and spent the afternoon reviewing revised contract language for the Hargrove and Lund follow-up. My phone buzzed steadily on my desk for most of the afternoon and I turned it face down. At 6 o'clock, I called my parents back. Not because I owed them an explanation, but because I genuinely did not want my mother losing sleep over this if it could be avoided with 10 minutes of honesty. My father answered. "Do you understand what you did today?" "I retrieved property I purchased," I said. "You humiliated your brother in his own home. Dad, I need you to hear me clearly. His son destroyed 8 months of my work and you all told me to redraw it. No apology. No acknowledgement of what it cost me, not just in time, in a major client opportunity. And when I brought it up to my brother, he told me I act like my job is more important than the family. You could have talked to us about that. I did talk to you about it. At dinner. You told me to draw it again. Silence on his end. The things I took back today, I paid for all of them. I have every receipt. There was no agreement that any of it was a gift. I helped because I wanted to and because I was able to and because I thought that was what you did for family. But family doesn't watch something important to you get destroyed and tell you to relax. So I'm making some adjustments. Some adjustments. He repeated, his voice going cold. Your brother's son is 4 years old, Daniel. And my brother is 34 years old, I said. Fully capable of teaching his son that other people's belongings matter. Fully capable of apologizing on his behalf. He didn't do either. Neither did you. My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we need you at Sunday dinner. Something in his voice had shifted slightly and I recognized the shift because I'd heard it before, usually when the conversation was about to become practical. There's a situation with the renovation contracts for the storefront property, he continued. He and my mother owned a small commercial property they rented to 2 businesses, a dry cleaner and a bookstore, and they had been talking about a renovation for the better part of 2 years. The contractor we were using backed out. Your mother and I were hoping you could step in and help us manage the process. I understood then. This wasn't about family dinner. This was about the property. You want me to manage a commercial renovation, I said. You're an architect. It would take you no time? It would take me considerable time, Dad. That's my profession. We're your parents. Yes, I said. And I have been helping this family in every way I know how for as long as I can remember. And on Sunday, when something that mattered to me professionally was destroyed in your house, none of you treated it like it mattered. So I need you to understand that things are going to be different going forward. I'm happy to have a real conversation about the storefront project, but it will go through my office, through my standard process, and at my standard rate. He didn't like that. He said several things I had heard before about family obligations and ingratitude and how this wasn't the way things were done. I listened to all of it, and when he finished, I told him I loved him and I hoped to talk soon and I ended the call. My brother texted me that night. It was a long message, the kind you can tell someone drafted and deleted and redrafted several times before sending. It said that what I had done was calculated and vindictive, and that his son would be upset when he came home and asked where the couch was, and that I obviously cared more about my career than I did about my family, and that he hoped I was happy. At the very end it said he was sorry about the sketchbooks. Those were the only 3 words in the entire message I believed. I read the text twice and put my phone down and went to bed. The following week, the letter of intent from Hargrove and Lund came through in writing. My firm's principal, a woman named Carla who had taken a chance on me 6 years ago when I was 25 and had almost no portfolio, called me into her office to go over it. She was not an effusive person, she did not celebrate easily, but she closed her laptop and looked at me directly and said, "This is a landmark project for this office. You should be proud of what you put in front of them." I thought about redrawing 40 pages in a motel room at midnight. I thought about the proportion error I caught because I had to start over. I had some help, I said. Carla looked at me sideways. From who? Unintentional help, I said. From my family. She clearly had no idea what I meant by that, and she moved on to the contract terms, which was the right call. The project was formally announced to the firm the next day. My name was attached to it. 3 colleagues who had been in the running for the Hargrove and Lund pitch sent congratulations emails, which I appreciated and responded to honestly. My assistant, a sharp 23-year-old named Priya who had been with me for 8 months, printed out the letter of intent and taped it to the wall of my office without asking, and when I came back from lunch and saw it, I left it there. My parents called twice that week. I answered once, on a Thursday. My mother did most of the talking. She told me she had been thinking about Sunday and that she was sorry she hadn't taken it more seriously when I told them about the sketchbooks. She said it in the careful way people say things when they're not entirely sure where the line is between apology and absolution, but she said it, and I heard her out. I told her I appreciated it. I told her the project had come together and the pitch had gone well. I did not tell her about the letter of intent, not because I was being cruel, but because I was still deciding how much of my professional life I wanted to share with people who had historically responded to it by telling me to relax. My brother and I did not speak. His wife sent one message saying she thought what I did was hurtful to their family and she hoped I would reflect on it. I did not respond to that one. What I did reflect on, in the weeks that followed, was a pattern I had been in so long I had stopped noticing it. The architecture of a family. The way load-bearing elements can be invisible until something tests them. I had been load-bearing for years financially, practically, emotionally, in the background sense that the person who reliably shows up always becomes the person everyone else builds their plans around. When you take that person out of the structure, things shift. That's not cruelty. That's physics. There were some things I couldn't unknow now. That my brother's default response to my professional life was a shrug. That my father's expression of care almost always resolved into a request for something. That my mother's affection, genuine as it was, did not extend to protecting my time or my work when it cost her the peace of a family dinner. These weren't new facts. I had just been performing not knowing them for a long time. 6 weeks after the dinner, my father called to tell me they had hired a different contractor for the storefront renovation. Someone cheaper, he said. He did not say this to hurt me. He said it the way he says most things about money, matter-of-factly, without registering that there might be a subtext. I told him that sounded like a good decision, and I hoped it went well. There was a pause, and then he said, "Your mother and I are proud of you, Daniel. We don't always say it right, but we are." It was the most direct thing he had said to me in a long time. It landed somewhere complicated, the way things do when they're true and insufficient at the same time. "I know," I said. The Hargrove and Lund contract was fully executed on a Friday afternoon in late November. I signed it at my office desk with Carla watching over my shoulder and Priya taking photos for the firm's records. The scope was everything we had pitched: full architectural services on a 7-building waterfront development, 18 months of design work, with construction administration to follow. It was the largest single contract my firm had ever signed. That evening, I drove to the waterfront site, the actual site in Charleston where I had stood 4 times over the past 8 months taking photographs and writing notes in sketchbooks that no longer existed. I parked and walked down to the water and stood there in the cold for a while, watching the light change over the harbor. The site was empty. Weeds and gravel and a chain-link fence with a faded construction notice from a project that had fallen through years ago. In 18 months, it would start becoming something different. I thought about the moment I had walked back into my parents' house that Sunday and found the pages on the floor. I thought about the drive to the motel. I thought about 11 o'clock at night, my drawing tablet lit up on a desk next to a complimentary notepad with a motel logo on it, rebuilding something I had already built once. I thought about the proportion error I caught. The thing I almost missed. I didn't call my brother. I didn't post anything. I just stood there at the edge of a future construction site and let it be mine for a minute before it became a project. Before it became a building, before it became the kind of thing that ends up in a portfolio and gets described in professional language that doesn't capture any of the actual hours. There's a version of this story where I regret taking back the couch, where I wish I had handled things more gently, given my brother more time to come around, let the sting of it pass and rebuilt the relationship from a softer place. I have considered that version carefully. But here's what I know. When his son was sitting on my parents' bedroom floor surrounded by torn pages, nobody in that house looked at what was destroyed and thought about me. Nobody calculated the cost or the timing or what it meant for Thursday. They looked at the mess and thought about how to smooth over the awkward moment at dinner. That is the most honest accounting of what happened, and I have stopped softening it to make it easier to hold. I drove home from the waterfront. I ordered dinner. I sat in my apartment, my space, in a city I had built a life in without much assistance from anyone, and I ate my food and read through a structural engineering report for the Hargrove and Lund site and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not happy exactly. Not at peace. More like present. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly the work I was supposed to be doing. With no part of my attention leaking backward into a room where someone was always waiting for me to come fix something. My brother texted me on Christmas Eve. It said, "Merry Christmas. Hope you're well." 5 words with a period at the end. I stared at it for a moment and then typed back, "Merry Christmas." 2 words. A beginning or an ending. I honestly wasn't sure which, and I decided it was okay not to know yet. Some debts are financial and you can settle them with receipts. Some are different. The second kind doesn't resolve on a Tuesday morning with a moving crew. It resolves slowly, over time, in the accumulation of days where you make different choices than you used to make. Where you stop performing availability for people who have not earned it. Where you learn to let your phone ring. I am 31 years old. My name is Daniel Marsh. I designed a building that will stand on a waterfront in Charleston for 100 years. I drew it twice, and the second version was better. That is the whole story, and also, it's barely the beginning.